Good evening. Thanks for tuning in to Real America. My name is Jobob, and I'll be filling in for Dan Ball for the rest of the week. Very quickly, I'll answer the question that you probably have in your head. Yes, Jobob. One grandpa was Joe, the other one was Bob, but we won't dwell on it. As Dan mentioned last week, he's having a surgical procedure, but we'll be back on Monday, so let's get started. Time Magazine, a website that used to be printed on paper, is known around the world for their Person of the Year selection, a now time-honored tradition that dates all the way back to 1927. But the criteria has changed. In decades past, Time would select the individual who affected the news or our lives the most, for better or worse, during the calendar year. And for better or worse, it's a principle that they used to stick to. There have been horrible people who have made the cover of Time's Person of the Year. But even though they did things that were awful, they had the biggest impact in the world. Adolf Hitler is a notable example. But in the last couple years, Time has veered away from its original definition to make way for their own political views. Now, to be fair, by default, Time does need to deviate just a little bit from their stated purpose because, in my opinion, given the benchmark, the single biggest impactful person would always be the sitting U.S. president. And given that Time is a business and every year does need to be interesting, I can give a little bit of grace to that idea, even though they might venture outside just a little bit from the president. But how far outside their stated purpose are they willing to go to appease their political needs? To their credit, Donald Trump was the Person of the Year in 2016. But in 2019, they named the then 16-year-old climate complainer, Greta Thunberg, as the Person of the Year. Apparently, mostly incoherently yelling at the United Nations passes for massive impact. Then in 2020, Time got slightly back on track. Kind of. In the spirit of being consistent with my previous thoughts, Time's 2020 Person of the Year was Joe Biden. And also Kamala Harris. Now, while I don't agree with his politics, I understood Joe Biden. But Kamala? Not so much. First things first, I'm not sure how running for president, polling less than 1%, and then ultimately dropping out of the race before the Iowa caucus makes much of an impact on our lives at all. Although, maybe it was the fact that Kamala, despite being severely disliked among her own party, was an example to minorities everywhere that we too can be a diversity hire. Then, in 2021, Time's online blog selected Elon Musk, who became the world's richest man. And if I'm being fair, that made sense. There will always be a good argument for a variety of individuals, and even though the premise was based on Elon's electric cars saving the environment, that choice and the argument backing Musk at least holds water. But this year, it seems to be getting more into the partisan weeds. The finalists for the 2022 award were released on Twitter, and while Elon, probably rightly, made the cut again, there's another name on the short list that sure is a head-scratcher. Soon-to-be former Wyoming Congresswoman Liz Cheney. Now, you may have the same question that I had. Why? Yes, Liz Cheney was the star of the universally unwatched January 6 congressional hearings, but the last time I checked, the lead character of a reality TV show that nobody watched wasn't considered to be someone who had a severe impact on the news. If that were the case, maybe they should also nominate whoever came in third on this season of The Bachelor. Realistically, if we're sticking to the Person of the Year as someone who, or some group, who impacted the lives and the news for better or worse, then honestly, Vladimir Putin should probably make the cut, as much as I don't like to say it. But he wasn't even nominated. Volodymyr Zelensky and Xi Jinping were nominated, and they both make sense. But putting Liz Cheney in the same category? That seems like a stretch. So we ask ourselves, how did what used to be a reputable endeavor end up being such a partisan screech? Here to comment is TVUSA contributor Morgan McMichael. Morgan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Jobob.
first things first, you're a young Gen Zer. Do you even know, does your generation even know what Time magazine is or was? I'm just curious.
I know what Time magazine is, and I've always thought that Person of the Year was something really cool to look at. You're like walking, you're like, oh, who's the Person of the Year? I mean, last year was Elon Musk, like you said, makes sense. The year before, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris doesn't make sense when they weren't even elected yet. So I think it's quite funny that seeing this year we have Liz Cheney even quite compared to Elon Musk or even Ron DeSantis, who is also on that list as well. It doesn't make sense to me. But Gen Z, we do know what it is. But this whole thing of Time magazine, to me, just looks like another way that the left is using their political theater in magazines.
I was going to tell you, just in case you weren't aware, Time magazine is a website they used to print out on paper for some reason. So I'm curious, where did we go off the rails here? Why is it, in your opinion, that Time magazine is needing to seemingly force their own political partisanship on their readers?
Why not? At this point, every single major media outlet like Time, we see doing this exact same thing. And I think they're just going to use the Person of the Year to continue going down that path. I mean, I'm honestly surprised that BLM activists weren't nominated or some sort of protesters or like LGBTQIA rallies. So it's quite funny.
Yeah, I did. I'm getting in my ear that it is possible that they may nominate the second P in the LGBTQ2P plus IA, all of those letters going together. Morgan, how do we fix it? How do we collectively as a nation try to, at least in some circumstances, in this circumstance in particular, put the partisan stuff aside and get back to the definition of things which we used to operate on?
I think we just need to start having more conversations with people and really bring these big issues to light. When it comes to the magazine, though, I think that Elon Musk would be a great winner for 2022, seeing that he purchased Twitter and is really freeing free speech here, that we see Twitter is becoming a free speech platform. So if it were up to me, I would pick Elon. 2 years in a row, Time magazine makes sense to me.
You heard it here first. Morgan's vote is in. Morgan, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.